During our show today, we're going to talk a little about the 2019 year in review. So we want to talk today about what we can learn from 2019 and how we can improve our farms because of that going forward.
Let's start at planting time, Brian. It was wet, and I had a local radio personality tease me a little bit. He said, "Why are you farmers complaining? You had the widest planting window you've ever had. You planted from April until the end of June and even into July." And of course, we all know that's not a good thing when we can't get planting done timely. Here's one of the challenges, though, with that planting is hybrid maturity and switching hybrids. We had a lot of farmers that switched hybrids multiple times during the year, just kept hoping, hey, we're going to get in this week, and nope, it didn't happen. Hey, we're going to get in the next week, and again, it didn't happen. And by the time you start taking a 110-day intended hybrid and you get in there a month or two late, well, you're down in the 95-day category. Now, some farmers just refused to switch, and that turned out to be a big mistake this year. One thing that I learned in 2019 is you really do have to move back in hybrid maturity. It is going to make a big difference. You're not going to catch up later in the season in most cases. And here's the other thing, you really aren't giving up that much yield. Now, if you're going to plant 110-day corn in a 110-day environment against a 95-day hybrid, I would expect that 110-day corn to win almost 100% of the time. However, if you're planting that 110-day corn a month late, all of a sudden, I would expect the 95-day hybrid to win. Not only did we see better test weights, we sometimes saw better overall yield to begin with. So it's something not to be afraid of going forward. Switch back in maturities, and even as you build your plan for this year, if you still have some wet ground going into the winter, well, you're probably going to have some wet ground in the spring, so you should be taking some portion of your farm to earlier hybrids with your initial order as well.
Way back in 2007, we bought our first tile plow for our farm. And I just remember back then our dad had some advice for us on tile. Well, his advice when we first bought our tile plow was, if you have the money, put in bigger tile than you need and put in more tile than you think you need. Because he said, in my entire life, I've never run into a farmer who said, I put in too much tile. He said, every single farmer always says, I don't put enough tile in. Well, sure enough, on our farm, we had been tiling for years and years for 20 to 25 inches of total annual precip like we normally get. Well, in 2018 and 2019, we got 40 inches. 40! We were not set up for 40 inches. We should have put more tile in.
One other thing that was really prevalent in 2019 that offered us the chance to learn some lessons the hard way was disease pressure. Now, there are a number of them that we could talk about. Certainly white mold this year in soybeans and edible beans and sunflowers was really horrible in the northern part of the country. Frog-eye leaf spot was absolutely terrible this year through much of the country, and that even crept a long ways north. And of course, tar spot is something that on years like we had in 2019 was a real problem, and it spread into new areas in the United States that farmers are going to have to start managing for tar spot as well.
One of the biggest things I saw in 2019 is what a difference seed treatments made. Because the spring was colder and wetter than normal, you could really see a difference between the great seed treatments and the average ones, or especially the great seed treatments and the poor ones or the untreated soybeans that were out there. As farmers, we need great seed treatment products. And the nice thing here in the last few years, we've seen new and better fungicides come along, and we have seen a lot more biological, or as we call them, natural products come along. We're to the point now we have 33 seed treatments on the seed corn that we plant. 33. You think about that, it sounds absolutely crazy, but because of that, we've been able to shorten the time that it takes to get that seed out of the ground. Instead of 100 growing degree units like we normally figure, we're down to 75 or 80 GDUs to pop that seed out of the ground. And the other thing along with that is we're perfectly comfortable planting when the soil temps are 40 degrees now instead of 50. The old thing was when you're going to plant your corn, it's got to be 50 degree soil temps. You absolutely do not need to do that now if you've got the very best seed treatments. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying mud your crop in. The ground has to be fit. But if it's cold, no big deal. The new seed treatments can push your corn even when the soil temp is cold.
And speaking of planting, we're going to spend more time this winter talking about what a difference getting the planter set correctly made this year in 2019. Now, you may say, well, sure it did because we had such horrible soil conditions for a lot of the season and we planted into some stuff we maybe shouldn't have. Well, that may be part of the reason, but even with all the new technology that's going into planters, it still takes a farmer that's really crafty with getting things set and adjusting for the conditions. And we saw some huge variability, even row to row on a planter going through the same soil conditions. So don't kid yourself, it wasn't just, 2019 was a bad year. There are some things we need to change even for good soil conditions with our planters.
The last thing I've got is just all the lodging and green snap issues we saw in 2019. I saw more green snap in 2019 than I've ever seen in my life, and it's not even close. Well, part of the reason I think we had this problem is because people were planting corns that don't normally fit in that area. It was earlier corns. There was a big rush to get that corn growing. The wind came at just the wrong time. There was a lot of fertility that was going to get applied but didn't get applied in both 2018 and 2019 because everything was so wet. So you start adding all these factors up and you go, oh, okay, yeah, it is starting to make sense why we've had an issue. Well, I will just tell you this, if you've got a lodging or a green snap problem, or if you've had this in the past on your farm, it's most likely a fertility issue. Now, I realize the tendency is to blame the seed dealer. It's not the seed corn's fault, okay? It's usually a fertility problem. Now, I'm not saying that the variety doesn't make a difference, it does, but I'm just saying everything will be better if you make your fertility better. So what I would challenge you to do in any area, in any crop, if you've got a lodging or fertility problem, go soil test there. I'm going to bet that you've got low K, low manganese, low copper, or all three of those. With potassium, we're really shooting for 4 to 8% base saturation K, and if you're going for big time yields, I'd say you need to be in the 6 to 8% base saturation K range. That's the #1 factor when it comes to green snap and lodging.
Well, yes, 2019 was not a very good year for many farms across the country, but what I do look at is where the lessons are that we could learn from. Let's make the changes. In agriculture, too often we continue to do things the same way and expect different results. We need to make some changes on our farm, learn from the lessons on your farm from 2019, and move forward with more success.
There were a lot of lessons to be learned in 2019 in terms of weed control as well. We'll talk about this week's Weed of the Week and how to stop it on your farm coming up later in the show.